There is a verse in the Bible that almost nobody preaches about. It is not hidden in some obscure Old Testament genealogy. It is not buried in a footnote or an appendix. It sits right in the middle of the most important event in all of Scripture, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And yet, Sunday after Sunday, year after year, pastors skip right over it. Theologians avoid it. Commentaries rush past it in a single paragraph. Here is the verse. Matthew chapter 27, verses 52 and 53. The tombs broke open, and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. Read that again slowly. Dead people came out of their graves, walked into Jerusalem, and showed themselves to the living. This is not a parable. This is not a metaphor. This is not a vision given to a prophet in a dream. Matthew records it as a plain historical event. The same way he records the tearing of the temple curtain, the same way he records the earthquake. And yet, most of us have never heard a single sermon about it. Why? That question alone should make you pay very close attention to what comes next. Because by the end of this video, you will understand who these people were, why they rose, what it means for your future, and why the church has been so quiet about it for so long. But first, you need to understand exactly what was happening in Jerusalem on that Friday afternoon. It is roughly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The sky over Jerusalem has been dark for 3 hours, not because of clouds, but because something unnatural has swallowed the sun. On a hill just outside the city walls, a man hangs on a Roman cross. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. His body is broken. His blood has soaked into the wood and dripped into the dirt below. A crowd watches, some weeping, some mocking, most just staring. And then he cries out with a loud voice and breathes his last. At that exact moment, something happens that has never happened before and has never happened since. Matthew describes it in rapid fire, 7 events, linked by 7 uses of the word "and." The curtain of the temple tears in two from top to bottom. The earth shakes. The rocks split apart. The tombs break open. The bodies of many holy people who had died are raised to life. They come out of the tombs. They appear to many people in the holy city. 7 events, 1 sentence, no pause. Matthew does not slow down to explain any of it. He does not add commentary. He simply reports what happened, as if the events themselves are enough. Now, most people are familiar with the torn curtain and the earthquake. Those get preached about regularly. But those last 3 events, the open tombs, the risen dead, the appearances in Jerusalem, those are the ones that get skipped. And that is where the real mystery begins. To understand what happened, you first need to understand where it happened. First-century Jerusalem was surrounded by tombs, not the kind of flat graves we picture in modern cemeteries. These were rock-cut chambers carved directly into the limestone hillsides around the city. A family would hire stonemasons to chisel out a cave in the rock face. Inside, narrow slots called kokim were cut into the walls. Long, rectangular recesses just big enough to hold a human body. A large rolling stone sealed the entrance. The hills surrounding Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives, the Kidron Valley, the slopes south of the city, were dotted with hundreds of these tombs. Some belonged to wealthy families. Some held generations of the faithful dead. And here is a detail the English translation cannot show you. The Hebrew word for tomb is keber. But keber does not only mean a place of burial. The same root in Hebrew is deeply connected to the word for womb. In the Hebrew mind, a tomb was not simply a dead end. It was a holding place, a womb of the earth, waiting for God to bring forth life again. So when Matthew says the tombs broke open, a Jewish reader in the 1st century would have heard something far more dramatic than broken rock. They would have heard the sound of labor pains, the earth itself giving birth. Now here's the question that no one seems to want to answer. Who were these people? Matthew calls them holy ones, in Greek, hagioi. That word does not mean perfect people. It means people who were set apart, devoted to God, faithful to the covenant. Some scholars believe they were recently deceased followers of Jesus, people like Simeon or Anna from the temple, or even Lazarus' neighbors in Bethany. Others believe they were Old Testament saints, patriarchs and prophets whose bodies had been buried in the hills around Jerusalem for centuries. Matthew does not give us names. He does not tell us how many there were. He only says, many. Not all, but many. And he says they appeared to many people in the holy city. Think about what that means. These were not ghosts floating through walls. These were not visions that only one person could see. Matthew uses the word appeared, the same Greek word used later to describe the resurrection appearances of Jesus himself. These were physical bodies, seen by multiple witnesses, walking through the streets of Jerusalem. Now, before we go any further, there is a timing puzzle in this passage that has confused readers for 2,000 years. Matthew says the tombs broke open when Jesus died, on Friday afternoon, but then he says the saints came out of the tombs after his resurrection, which was Sunday morning. So what happened in between? Were these bodies just lying in open tombs for 2 days? This is one of the reasons scholars have struggled with the passage, but the early church fathers had a clear answer. The tombs cracked open at the moment of Jesus' death. The earthquake physically broke the rock seals, but the dead were not raised until after Jesus rose on Sunday morning. Why? Because Jesus had to rise first. The Apostle Paul calls Jesus the firstfruits of those who have fallen asleep in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. In the Jewish harvest system, the firstfruits were the very first portion of the crop, offered to God before any other grain could be touched. Jesus is the firstfruits of resurrection. No one rises before he does. So the tombs opened on Friday. That was the earthquake, the physical breaking. But the rising happened on Sunday. After Jesus himself walked out of his own tomb, he went first. They followed. Now here is where the story gets even more extraordinary, and where it connects to a prophecy that is over 500 years older than the cross. Open your Old Testament to Ezekiel chapter 37. The prophet Ezekiel is standing in a valley. The valley is filled with bones, dry, scattered, human bones as far as the eye can see. God asks him a question. Son of man, can these bones live? Ezekiel answers carefully. Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then God tells him to prophesy to the bones. And as Ezekiel speaks, there is a rattling sound. The bones begin to move. They come together, bone to bone, tendon to tendon, flesh covering them, skin wrapping around them, but they are not yet alive. Then God tells Ezekiel to call the breath, the ruach, the spirit. And breath enters the bodies, and they stand up on their feet, a vast army. For centuries, Jewish readers understood this vision as a promise. God would one day raise his people from the dead. Now read Matthew 27 again. The tombs broke open. The bodies of the holy ones were raised. They came out in the holy city. Ezekiel's valley of dry bones had come to life in the hills of Jerusalem. The prophecy was not just a metaphor. It was a preview. And on the day Jesus died and rose, the preview became reality. But there is another layer here that almost no one notices. Go back to the 7 events Matthew lists. The curtain tears, the earth shakes, the rocks split, the tombs open, the bodies rise, they come out, they appear. Notice that every single one of these verbs is in the passive voice. The curtain was torn. It did not tear itself. The earth was shaken. It did not shake on its own. The tombs were opened. No human hand rolled those stones away. The bodies were raised. The dead did not wake themselves up. Every verb points to an invisible hand, God himself, acting in the physical world at the exact moment his son died. This was not chaos. This was not random destruction. This was God ripping open the barrier between heaven and earth, between life and death, between the old world and the new one that was about to begin. Now here is the question that keeps historians up at night. If dead people actually walked through the streets of Jerusalem, why does only Matthew mention it? Mark does not record it. Luke does not record it. John does not record it. No Roman historian, no Jewish source, no other ancient document mentions this event. Critics use this silence as evidence that it never happened. But that argument has serious problems. First, the gospel writers were not trying to produce identical reports. Each one selected events based on his audience and purpose. Matthew was writing for a Jewish audience, people who would immediately recognize the connection to Ezekiel 37, to the day of the Lord, to the promises of resurrection. Mark, Luke, and John had different priorities. Second, Matthew places this event inside a chain of historically verified details. The torn curtain is confirmed by Mark and Luke. The earthquake is confirmed by geological evidence. A study published in the International Geology Review found seismic disruption in Dead Sea sediment layers dating to around 33 AD. The centurion's reaction is confirmed by all 3 other Gospels. Matthew links the risen saints to these verified events with the same word, and, 7 times in a row. He does not switch genres. He does not signal a metaphor. He does not say, "It was like," or "in a vision." He says it happened. Third, and this might be the most powerful argument, the early church fathers believed it without hesitation. Ignatius of Antioch, writing around 110 AD, was a student of the Apostle John himself. He wrote, "The bodies of the saints that slept arose, their graves being opened. He descended into Hades alone, but he arose accompanied by a multitude." Irenaeus, who knew Polycarp, who knew the Apostle John, wrote that many souls ascended and were seen in their bodies. Origen, Tertullian, Jerome, Chrysostom, Cyril of Jerusalem, Augustine. Every major church father who addressed this passage treated it as historical fact. Not one of them called it a metaphor. Not one of them called it a legend. Augustine himself called these events facts and things that were done, recorded by gospel historians. So the silence of the other gospel writers does not mean it did not happen. It means Matthew was the one chosen to record it. And for 2,000 years, the greatest minds in church history believed him. But here is the part that should hit you the hardest, and the part that most people never consider. Why did God do this? Why raise dead saints at that specific moment? Why not wait until the final resurrection at the end of time? The answer is in the timing. These saints did not rise at some random moment in history. They rose when Jesus died and emerged when Jesus rose. Their resurrection was directly connected to his. John Piper wrote that this event was a foretaste, a trailer, of what is coming for every believer. Think about what a movie trailer does. It gives you just enough to prove the full film is real and it is coming. That is exactly what happened on the hills of Jerusalem that weekend. A handful of the faithful dead walked out of their tombs, not because the final resurrection had arrived, but because God was showing the world what Jesus' death had just purchased. The price of your future resurrection was paid at that cross. And God gave a receipt, walking, breathing, visible proof, in the streets of Jerusalem. Chrysostom, the great preacher of the 4th century, understood this perfectly. He wrote, "If it was a great thing to raise Lazarus after 4 days, how much greater was it that those who had long slept should show themselves alive? This is indeed a proof of the resurrection to come." In other words, Lazarus was impressive, but Lazarus was one man, dead 4 days. These were many saints, some dead for years or even centuries, and they rose, not because someone prayed over their tomb, but because the Son of God breathed his last on a cross half a mile away. His death cracked the earth open. His resurrection pulled them out. And that same power is the guarantee that one day, every believer who has ever lived will rise. So why does nobody talk about this? Honestly, there are a few reasons. The passage is short, only 2 verses. It raises more questions than it answers. It makes people uncomfortable because it sounds strange. Dead people walking through a city. And in a world that already questions the resurrection of Jesus, adding more resurrections on the same weekend feels like too much to defend. So pastors skip it. Teachers gloss over it. And one of the most powerful proofs of what the cross accomplished sits untouched in the middle of the greatest chapter in the Bible. But you have heard it today, and now you cannot unhear it. The tombs broke open. The dead walked. They appeared to many. And the same God who split those rocks, who cracked those tombs, who breathed life back into those ancient bones, that same God holds your name and your future and your resurrection in his hands. The question is not whether the dead rose in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. The question is, do you believe he will do it again?